as a distant disturbance in the Atlantic, became one of the most destructive storms Western Europe had seen in decades. By mid-November 2025, its impact was felt across Portugal, England, and Wales, leaving behind a landscape transformed by wind, rain, and rising waters. What began as a typical late-season cyclone quickly grew into a violent weather event fueled by unusually warm ocean temperatures and unstable atmospheric pressure. The storm's first landfall occurred on November 15, 2025, when Claudia slammed into Portugal with little warning. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed by floodwaters within minutes. Among the first confirmed casualties was an elderly couple from a village near Lisbon, found in their submerged home after the river near their street burst its banks overnight. Farther south in Albira, a tornado spawned by Claudia tore through a campsite, overturning a caravan and scattering debris hundreds of meters away. Emergency workers described the scene as chaotic and heartbreaking as they struggled to reach stranded survivors. After carving a destructive path across the Iberian Peninsula, Claudia accelerated northward. Meteorologists watching the storm from satellite images realized that the system had absorbed an unusual amount of energy from the Atlantic. By the time it approached Britain, it had transformed into a sprawling storm complex carrying enough moisture to drench entire regions in just a few hours. When the storm crossed into England and Wales later that evening, it brought torrential rains so intense that several rivers overflowed within the first hour. The town of Monmouth, situated between two river systems, became the epicenter of the disaster. The River Mon, usually calm and picturesque, surged violently over its embankments. Streets turned into muddy canals, shops filled with dark water, and vehicles were lifted and carried downstream like toys. Thick layers of mud coated everything: roads, garden walls, public squares, and even the interior of grocery stores. Residents described waking up to the sound of rushing water and the frightening realization that their doors would not open because the rising flood pressed against them from the outside. South Wales Fire and Rescue Service immediately declared a major incident. Hundreds of firefighters, paramedics, volunteers, and even local farmers with tractors joined the effort. Emergency crews worked through the night, navigating dangerous terrain dotted with fallen trees and collapsed walls. Matt Jones, the fire service area manager, announced that the conditions in Monmouth were life-threatening at every turn, urging the public to avoid the region entirely. Other parts of England were also overwhelmed. In the southwest, streams turned into violent currents that swept through villages. In central England, small market towns found their high streets covered in knee-deep water. Major roads were cut off, isolating entire communities. Train services were suspended due to flooded tracks, trapping commuters in stations for hours. Several evacuation centers were opened in community halls and sports arenas. Families who had lost everything arrived carrying only what they had managed to grab during the chaos: blankets, small bags, or a few personal items. Volunteers handed out hot drinks, clothes, and emergency bedding. The storm devastated infrastructure on a scale that local authorities were unprepared to handle. Bridges linking rural communities cracked under the pressure of swollen rivers. Drainage systems built decades ago were incapable of handling the extraordinary volume of water, causing widespread backups. In many neighborhoods, power outages lasted more than 24 hours, leaving residents in cold, dark homes while floodwaters continued to rise. Economic losses were projected to reach hundreds of millions of pounds. Agricultural lands were submerged, destroying crops and drowning livestock. Small business owners in towns like Monmouth, Hereford, and Gloucester reported catastrophic damage to their premises. Some shops that had been family-owned for generations were left with nothing but mud-soaked shelves and waterlogged stock. For many uninsured or underinsured businesses, recovery seemed nearly impossible without government intervention. Beyond the visible destruction, the storm inflicted deep emotional scars. Thousands of people were forced to abandon their homes, unsure when or if they could return. Children were especially affected, struggling to understand why their toys, books, and rooms had disappeared under muddy water. Mental health specialists warned that the psychological impact would persist long after the physical cleanup. The education systems suffered disruptions as well. Several schools in Wales and southwestern England closed due to structural damage or unsafe conditions. Some classrooms were filled with mud, while others had walls weakened by water infiltration. Temporary teaching facilities had to be arranged, and in the hardest-hit areas, distance learning was reinstated. Environmental consequences also emerged quickly. Floodwaters carried debris, sewage, chemicals, and runoff into rivers and lakes, contaminating previously clean water sources. Ecologists reported early signs of habitat disturbance, including fish deaths and displaced wildlife. Fragile species were at risk of relocating or declining due to the sudden changes in their environment. Soil erosion on farmlands increased the risk of future landslides, making rehabilitation even more challenging. From a political standpoint, Hurricane Claudia became a wake-up call. Government leaders faced mounting pressure to overhaul disaster preparedness policies. Emergency response systems, early warning communication, and infrastructure development were all identified as areas requiring urgent reform. Critics argued that several towns had outdated flood defenses that failed to prevent catastrophic damage. The energy and utility sectors faced enormous strain. Power grids were damaged, transformers were submerged, and water treatment facilities were forced offline. Thousands of households temporarily lost access to clean water. In some rural areas, residents had to rely on bottled supplies delivered by military personnel. Yet amid the devastation, stories of resilience and unity emerged. Neighbors helped neighbors, strangers offered shelter, and volunteers traveled from unaffected regions to assist cleanup efforts. In Monmouth, teams of residents formed human chains to clear debris from streets. Others distributed meals, blankets, and emotional support to families who had lost everything. Military personnel worked alongside local emergency services, reinforcing riverbanks, delivering supplies by boat, and transporting vulnerable individuals to safe locations. The collaborative effort highlighted the strength and compassion of the affected communities. Even as Claudia moved away from the region, the long journey toward recovery had only begun. Rebuilding homes, restoring infrastructure, protecting the environment, and healing emotional wounds would take months, and in many places, years. But the shared determination of residents, volunteers, and authorities offered a glimmer of hope in a time marked by
trapped in here at the moment. I hope he makes it to safety. Called for help, but it's not easy for them to get here. This is it. This is